The sun cast a golden glow over the rolling plains of Wyoming Territory as Sarah Vance ducked behind the mercantile building, adjusting her bonnet to shield her face from more than just the harsh summer sun of 1878. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the tender skin beneath her right eye, wincing at the pain that radiated from the fresh bruise. 3 weeks as Frank Hollister's wife, and already she bore the marks of his temper like badges of dishonor. Sarah drew a shaky breath, composing herself before stepping onto the busy main street of Willow Creek. The small frontier town had been her home for less than a month, yet it already felt like a prison. She kept her gaze downcast as she made her way toward the general store, clutching her basket tightly against her side. "Morning, Mrs. Hollister," called Mr. Jenkins from his barbershop doorway. Sarah forced a smile, careful not to make direct eye contact. "Good morning," she replied softly, quickening her pace. The fewer people who saw her face clearly, the better. Inside the general store, she moved methodically through the aisles, selecting flour, sugar, and coffee beans. The list Frank had given her was specific, and she dared not deviate from it. Last time she'd forgotten the tobacco, he'd made sure she wouldn't forget again. "Will that be all today, Mrs. Hollister?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, her eyes narrowing as she studied Sarah's downturned face. "Yes, thank you," Sarah murmured, counting out the coins Frank had allowed her. As she reached across the counter, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing the ring of purple bruises circling her wrist. Mrs. Peterson's sharp intake of breath made Sarah hastily withdraw her arm. "My dear, I'm quite clumsy, I'm afraid," Sarah interrupted, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Always walking into things." The older woman's eyes softened with concern and something else recognition. "If you ever need anything at all." The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. Sarah gathered her purchases quickly, desperate to escape before anyone else could notice her condition. As she turned to leave, she collided with a solid wall of muscle and leather. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice, steady hands grasping her shoulders to steady her. Sarah kept her face down, mumbling an apology as she tried to move past. But the stranger didn't release her immediately. Instead, one hand moved to gently tip her chin upward. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper. Startled, Sarah looked up into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man she'd never met before, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly beneath the brim of his Stetson. A cowboy by the look of his worn leather chaps and dusty boots. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to step back. The stranger's gaze lingered on the discoloration beneath her eye, which she knew her bonnet no longer concealed. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he released her. "Cooper Easton," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Just hired on at the Rockingham." "Sarah Hollister," she replied automatically, clutching her basket tighter. "I must be going, my husband expects me." Something flickered in Cooper's eyes at the mention of her husband, but he simply nodded and stepped aside. "Madam." Sarah hurried from the store, feeling his gaze follow her down the street. She didn't dare look back. Frank had warned her about talking to strange men, and she had no desire to provoke his jealousy. Yet something about Cooper Easton's direct gaze left her feeling both exposed and oddly protected, if only for that brief moment. The Hollister house sat at the edge of town, a small 2-story structure that Frank had purchased with the money from his cattle business. Sarah entered through the back door, setting her purchases on the kitchen table with practiced care. "That you, Sarah?" Frank's voice called from the sitting room. "Yes, I've returned with the supplies," she answered, keeping her voice even as she removed her bonnet and began unpacking the groceries. Frank appeared in the doorway, watching her with those cold gray eyes that could shift from indifference to rage in an instant. At 38, he was nearly 15 years her senior, with a reputation in town as a shrewd businessman. What the townsfolk didn't see was the man behind closed doors, the man who'd promised her father to care for his only daughter after the drought had destroyed their family farm, the man who'd seemed so kind during their brief courtship. Did you get everything on the list?" he asked, moving to inspect her purchases. "Yes, everything." Sarah busied herself with storing the flour, keeping her movements steady despite her racing heart. Frank nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The Petersons' daughter is getting married next weekend. I've been invited to attend." "You'll need a new dress," Sarah paused. "I could wear my blue dress." It's still quite the sharp sting of his hand against her cheek cut off her words, sending her stumbling against the counter. "When I say you need a new dress, you don't argue," Frank hissed, grabbing her arm. "And what did I tell you about keeping your face down in town? Mrs. Peterson was staring at you, wasn't she?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "I was careful, Frank, I promise. Not careful enough." His fingers dug into the bruises on her arm. "If people start asking questions, it'll be worse for you, you understand," she nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm sorry." Frank released her with a slight shove. "I've got business at the saloon, have dinner ready by 6. He grabbed his hat and coat, pausing at the door. "And Sarah, cover that eye better tomorrow. Use some of that powder your mother gave you." After he left, Sarah sank to the kitchen floor, silent tears streaming down her face. How had her life come to this? She was 23 years old, the daughter of a once prosperous farmer, educated at a ladies' academy back east. Now she was trapped in a marriage that had quickly revealed itself to be a prison, her husband's charming facade having dissolved within days of their wedding. Escape seemed impossible. Frank controlled every aspect of her life: the money, her movements through town, even which neighbors she could speak to. Her parents were gone, her father having passed just after her wedding and her mother following shortly after from grief. There was no family to return to, no refuge to seek. As she prepared the evening meal, Sarah's thoughts returned unexpectedly to the cowboy she'd met at the store. There had been something in Cooper Easton's eyes, a strength that didn't frighten, a concern without pity. She pushed the thought away. Dwelling on such encounters would only lead to more trouble. The following morning, Sarah rose early to prepare Frank's breakfast. He ate in silence, occasionally glancing up to assess her appearance. She had carefully applied powder to disguise the worst of the bruising, though nothing could fully conceal the swelling. "I'll be in Cheyenne on business for the next 3 days," Frank announced, folding his newspaper. "I expect the house to be spotless when I return, and Sarah," his gaze hardened, "don't go wandering around town while I'm gone. People talk." "Yes, Frank." She kept her eyes on her plate. After he departed, Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, dusting and scrubbing with mechanical precision. The silence that had once seemed oppressive now felt like a blessed reprieve. No footsteps to listen for, no temper to gauge. By afternoon, the house was gleaming, and Sarah found herself standing at the kitchen window, gazing at the distant mountains. A sudden longing for fresh air overwhelmed her. Frank wouldn't return until late Friday. Surely, a brief walk to the creek behind their property wouldn't invite gossip. Grabbing a shawl, Sarah slipped out the back door and made her way down the gentle slope toward the bubbling creek that marked the boundary of their land. The September air carried a hint of the coming autumn, and wildflowers still dotted the grassy bank. Sarah settled beneath a cottonwood tree, closing her eyes as the dappled sunlight warmed her face. "Mrs. Hollister." The voice startled her, and Sarah's eyes flew open to find Cooper Easton dismounting from his horse a few yards away. He led the chestnut gelding to the water's edge, allowing it to drink while he approached her cautiously. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, removing his hat. "I was just riding fence lines for Mr. Morgan and stopped to water my horse." Sarah rose quickly, adjusting her shawl. "I should be getting back." "Please," Cooper said, his voice gentle. "Don't leave on my account. It's a fine afternoon for enjoying the creekside." She hesitated, torn between propriety and the strange comfort his presence offered. "I shouldn't be seen talking with you, Mr. Easton. Cooper, please." He remained where he stood, making no move to come closer. "And if you're worried about impropriety, we're in full view of at least 3 homesteads from here." He gestured to the scattered houses visible in the distance. Sarah relaxed slightly, though she remained standing. "Are you new to Willow Creek? I don't recall seeing you before yesterday." "Arrived last week. Mr. Morgan hired me on after his foreman vouched for my work down in Colorado." Cooper's gaze drifted briefly to her face, where the afternoon light revealed what her powder couldn't fully conceal. His expression remained carefully neutral. "I've been meaning to explore the town properly, but haven't had much chance yet. Been working sunrise to sunset getting ready for the cattle drive." Sarah found herself responding to his easy manner despite her reservations. "Willow Creek isn't much compared to places like Cheyenne or Denver, but we have everything one might need. A good church, reliable doctor, decent school for the children. And friendly folks," Cooper added, though something in his tone suggested he might be questioning that assessment. "Most places I've worked, neighbors look out for each other." Sarah felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "I should return home. I have dinner preparations to attend to." Cooper nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Of course. Would you like me to walk you back to your property line?" "No," she answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. "That won't be necessary, thank you." As she turned to leave, Cooper spoke again. "Mrs. Hollister, if you ever need anything help of any kind, the Rockingham isn't far. Mr. Morgan's a good man and his wife even better." Sarah paused, not turning back. "Good day, Mr. Easton." She hurried up the slope toward her house, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, at least, not the kind of fear Frank inspired. It was something more complex, the frightening possibility of hope where none should exist. For the next 2 days, Sarah kept to the house, though she found herself drawn repeatedly to the window that faced the creek, half expecting to see a familiar figure on horseback. By Friday afternoon, with Frank due to return that evening, she had convinced herself that the encounter with Cooper Easton had been nothing more than a momentary kindness from a passing stranger. As she hung laundry in the yard, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Frank wasn't expected for hours yet, and he rarely rode, preferring the buggy for his business trips. Sarah squinted against the sun, her heart leaping strangely when she recognized the chestnut gelding and its rider. Cooper dismounted at the edge of her yard, keeping a respectful distance. "Mrs. Hollister," he called, "pardon the intrusion. Mr. Morgan asked me to deliver a message to Mr. Hollister about some cattle business." Sarah approached the fence, glancing nervously at the empty road. "My husband isn't home. He's expected back from Cheyenne this evening." Cooper nodded, then seemed to hesitate before reaching into his saddlebag. "In that case, I wonder if you might give him this letter when he returns." He extended an envelope toward her. Sarah took it, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I'll see that he gets it." Instead of leaving immediately, Cooper lingered, his blue eyes studying her with barely concealed concern. The bruise beneath her eye had faded to a sickly yellow-green, but new marks circled her throat where Frank had grabbed her during an argument before his departure. "Mrs. Hollister," Cooper began carefully. "I don't mean to overstep, but you should go, Mr. Easton," Sarah interrupted, her voice tight with panic. "My husband wouldn't approve of me speaking with you alone." Cooper's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand, but my offer still stands. If you ever need help day or night." The sound of an approaching buggy sent a bolt of terror through Sarah. "Go, please," she whispered urgently. Now, Cooper recognized the fear in her eyes and swung quickly back into his saddle. He tipped his hat once before spurring his horse away from the property, riding in the opposite direction from the approaching buggy. Sarah hurried to finish hanging the laundry, tucking the envelope into her apron pocket just as Frank's buggy pulled into the yard. She forced a smile as he descended, noting with trepidation the flush on his face that suggested he'd been drinking. "Welcome home," she said, keeping her voice steady as she approached to take his traveling bag. Frank surveyed her, then the house, his expression unreadable. "House looks clean enough," he grunted. "Dinner ready. It will be in half an hour," she answered, following him inside. "There's fresh coffee, and I can prepare something quick if you're hungry now." He waved dismissively, heading for his study. Sarah hesitated, then remembered the letter. "A ranch hand from the Rockingham brought this for you," she said, pulling the envelope from her pocket. "Something about cattle business." Frank took the letter, eyeing her suspiciously. "When? Just before you arrived," she answered truthfully. "I was hanging laundry when he rode up." Frank tore open the envelope, scanning its contents with a deepening frown. Morgan wants to discuss grazing rights, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Says he's sending his new man to talk terms tomorrow. He glanced up sharply. What did he look like, this ranch hand? Sarah's heart quickened. Tall, light brown hair, riding a chestnut horse. Did he say anything else to you? Anything at all? No, she lied, keeping her expression neutral. Just that Mr. Morgan wanted you to have the letter. I told him you'd been away. Frank studied her for a moment longer before nodding curtly. Get dinner ready. I'm going to wash up. That night, Frank's mood darkened with each glass of whiskey he consumed. Sarah moved carefully around the kitchen, cleaning up after their meal, tensing whenever his chair creaked. Morgan's getting too big for his britches, Frank suddenly declared, slamming his glass down. Trying to expand his herd onto land he's got no right to. Sarah made a non-committal sound, hoping to neither encourage nor discourage his ranting. And sending some cowboy to do his negotiating, Frank continued, his words slightly slurred. Man doesn't even have the decency to come himself. When Frank finally retired to bed, Sarah lingered downstairs, delaying the inevitable moment when she would have to join him. As she extinguished the lamps, her gaze drifted to the window facing the creek, where moonlight silvered the distant water. Somewhere beyond that creek was the Rockingham Ranch and a man who had looked at her bruises with something other than indifference. The following morning brought no reprieve from Frank's dark mood. He paced the house like a caged animal, occasionally pausing to peer out the window toward the road. When is this cowboy supposed to arrive? He demanded around noon. The letter didn't say, Sarah replied, concentrating on her mending. The sound of hoofbeats finally broke the tense silence. Frank straightened his vest and moved to the door. Stay inside, he commanded. This is business. From the parlor window, Sarah watched as Cooper Easton rode into their yard, as composed and respectful as ever. He dismounted, removing his hat as Frank approached. Though she couldn't hear their words, the stiff postures of both men suggested the conversation wasn't friendly. After several minutes, Frank gestured toward the barn, and both men walked in that direction, disappearing from her view. Sarah returned to her mending, ears straining for any sound of raised voices or trouble. Nearly an hour passed before the men emerged. Frank's face was tight with barely controlled anger, while Cooper maintained a professional demeanor as they exchanged final words. Before mounting his horse, Cooper's gaze briefly flicked toward the house toward the window where Sarah stood. Though there was no way he could see her through the reflection on the glass, she felt an odd connection in that moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Frank stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind him. Damn Morgan and his highfalutin ideas, he growled, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey despite the early hour. Thinks because he's got some fancy breeding stock from back east, he can dictate terms to everyone around here. Sarah kept her eyes on her needlework. Did you reach an agreement? For now, Frank muttered. But that cowboy of his, Easton, there's something about him I don't like. Too educated for a saddle tramp. Asked too many questions about the town, the people. His eyes narrowed suddenly. Did he say anything to you yesterday? Anything about me or our affairs? Sarah's needle paused mid-stitch. No, Frank, he only delivered the letter, as I told you. Frank studied her for a long moment before draining his glass. I'll be at the saloon, don't wait up. After he left, Sarah moved to the window, watching his figure recede toward town. Only then did she allow herself to breathe fully, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Something about Cooper Easton had rattled Frank, and while that could spell danger, a small, rebellious part of her took satisfaction in her husband's discomfort. The weeks that followed brought a routine of careful avoidance. Sarah kept strictly to her household duties, venturing into town only when necessary and always with her face carefully powdered and her manner subdued. Frank's temper remained unpredictable, though his abuse had become more calculated, fewer visible marks, more cutting words and psychological torments. October arrived with a brilliant display of autumn colors and preparations for the town's harvest festival. Despite Frank's reluctance, social obligations required their attendance. On the evening of the celebration, Sarah dressed in the new burgundy gown Frank had ordered for her, its high collar concealing the fading bruises on her neck. "Remember to smile," Frank instructed as their buggy approached the town square, where lanterns illuminated tables laden with food and a small band played cheerful tunes. "People are already talking. We don't need to give them more reason." "Yes, Frank," Sarah replied softly, adjusting her shawl. The evening progressed as such events always did, with Sarah playing the role of devoted wife, while Frank discussed business with other men and drank steadily from a flask he kept in his jacket. She exchanged pleasantries with the other wives, careful to keep conversation light and impersonal. "Mrs. Hollister," Mrs. Peterson greeted her warmly. "What a lovely gown. The color suits you beautifully." "Thank you," Sarah replied, accepting a cup of apple cider. "Your pumpkin pies are causing quite a sensation. I heard Mr. Jenkins has had 3 slices already." Mrs. Peterson laughed, then lowered her voice. "I wanted to introduce you to someone. Martha Morgan just arrived with her ranch hands in tow. Her husband's down with a touch of influenza, poor dear, but she insisted the boys deserved a night of celebration after the successful cattle drive." Before Sarah could formulate an excuse, Mrs. Peterson was guiding her toward a group near the edge of the square. Among them stood Cooper Easton, more formally dressed than she had seen him before, though still unmistakably a working cowboy. His eyes found hers immediately, a flash of recognition quickly masked by polite deference as Mrs. Peterson made introductions. "Mrs. Morgan, may I present Mrs. Hollister, the wife of Frank Hollister? Sarah, this is Martha Morgan of the Rockingham." Martha Morgan was a handsome woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She clasped Sarah's hand warmly. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Hollister. I've heard much about you from our church ladies, though I seldom make it to Sunday services myself. Ranch work doesn't observe the Sabbath, I'm afraid." "The pleasure is mine," Sarah responded, acutely aware of Cooper standing just behind his employer, his expression carefully neutral. "And these are some of our hands," Martha continued, introducing several men before gesturing to Cooper. "And this is Mr. Easton, our newest addition, a godsend during the cattle drive, I must say." Sarah inclined her head slightly. "We've met briefly. Mr. Easton delivered a message to my husband some weeks ago." Cooper tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam." The conversation continued pleasantly, with Martha doing most of the talking while Sarah contributed occasional comments. She was painfully aware of Frank watching from across the square, his expression darkening as he observed her in conversation with the Rockingham group. "If you'll excuse me," Sarah finally said, "I should check on my husband." As she turned to leave, Martha touched her arm lightly. "My dear, you must come to the ranch sometime. I've been trying to organize an afternoon tea for the ladies in the area. Nothing formal, just a chance to socialize away from town affairs." "That's very kind," Sarah replied, knowing she would never be allowed to accept such an invitation. "I'll speak to my husband about it." As she moved away, Cooper stepped forward as if to escort her, but a subtle shake of her head stopped him. She couldn't risk Frank seeing any particular attention from the cowboy. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful movements. By the time they returned home, Sarah could feel the familiar tension radiating from Frank, the dangerous quiet that preceded his worst outbursts. "Seemed awfully friendly with Morgan's people," he commented as she removed her shawl in the entryway. "Mrs. Peterson introduced us," Sarah explained, keeping her voice even. It would have been rude to refuse the introduction. Frank's hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm with bruising force. "And that cowboy, the one who couldn't take his eyes off you." "I barely spoke to Mr. Easton," she protested, wincing as his grip tightened. "Don't lie to me," Frank hissed, his face inches from hers. "I saw the way he looked at you. Have you been meeting him? Is that where you go when I'm not home?" "No," Sarah gasped. "Frank, please, you're hurting me." His other hand came up to grasp her throat, pushing her against the wall. "If I ever find out you've been with another man, I'll kill you both. Understand?" Sarah nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face. Frank released her suddenly, causing her to stumble and fall to her knees. Get upstairs, he ordered coldly. I can't stand the sight of you right now. Sarah fled to their bedroom, locking the door behind her, a small act of defiance that would likely earn her more punishment later, but she couldn't bear the thought of him touching her tonight. She changed quickly from her festival dress, wincing at the fresh bruises forming on her arm and throat. As she lay in bed, listening for Frank's heavy tread on the stairs, Sarah made a decision that had been forming in the darkest corners of her mind for weeks. She couldn't continue living this way. Somehow, she had to escape. The following Sunday, Sarah attended church alone, Frank having declared himself too busy with ledgers to accompany her. It was a rare freedom she treasured, these solitary hours of worship where she could briefly forget the prison her home had become. As the congregation filed out after the service, Sarah found herself face to face with Martha Morgan. Mrs. Hollister, how lovely to see you again, the older woman greeted her warmly. Are you feeling well, my dear? You look rather pale. Just a slight headache, Sarah replied, self-consciously adjusting her collar to ensure it covered the marks on her neck. Martha studied her with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. I wonder if you might assist me with something. I've been collecting garments for some of the poorer families before winter sets in, and I could use help sorting through them. Would you have time to visit the ranch tomorrow afternoon? My buggy could collect you. Sarah hesitated. Frank would never approve, yet he would be in town most of the day attending to business. I think I could manage that, she said finally. Around 2 o'clock, perfect, Martha smiled, squeezing Sarah's hand. Until tomorrow, then. The following day, Sarah waited nervously by the road at the appointed time, having left a note for Frank claiming she was helping at a church charity event. When Martha's buggy appeared, driven not by the woman herself but by Cooper Easton, Sarah nearly lost her nerve. Mrs. Morgan sends her apologies, Cooper explained, keeping a proper distance as she approached the buggy. Her rheumatism is troubling her today. She asked if I would drive you to the ranch instead. Sarah glanced back toward her house, conflict evident in her expression. Perhaps I should come another day. She was quite disappointed at the thought of postponing, Cooper said gently, but I understand if you're uncomfortable. Something in his tone, the lack of judgment, the simple offering of choice made Sarah's decision. She allowed him to help her into the buggy, careful to maintain a proper distance as they set off toward the rocking M. They rode in silence for several minutes before Cooper spoke again. Mrs. Morgan is a remarkable woman. Lost her first husband in the war, built this ranch with Mr. Morgan from almost nothing. She has a way of seeing things others miss. Sarah kept her gaze on the passing landscape. She seems very kind. She is that, Cooper agreed. Also fiercely protective of those she believes deserve protecting. The implication hung in the air between them, unacknowledged yet unmistakable. Sarah felt her defenses wavering in the face of such careful consideration. Mr. Easton, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you and Mrs. Morgan might think about my situation, there's nothing to be done. He is my husband. Cooper's hands tightened on the reins. There's always something to be done, Mrs. Hollister, always. The Rocking M Ranch sprawled across a beautiful valley, its main house a sturdier, more welcoming version of the buildings typical to the area. Martha Morgan greeted them from the porch, moving with the aid of a walking stick, but otherwise appearing hale and determined. Sarah, my dear, thank you for coming, she said warmly, leading her inside while Cooper took the buggy to the barn. I've prepared tea in the parlor. To Sarah's surprise, there were no charity garments to be seen. Once they were settled with teacups in hand, Martha regarded her with compassionate directness. I hope you'll forgive an old woman's deception, she began. There is no charity work today. I simply needed a way to speak with you privately, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. Sarah set her cup down, tension returning to her shoulders. Mrs. Morgan, Martha, please. The older woman leaned forward. Sarah, I've lived in this territory for 25 years. I've seen the signs before in other women's eyes, in the careful way they move, in the excuses they make for injuries that couldn't possibly have come from falling down the stairs. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Martha's voice remained gentle but firm. Frank Hollister has a reputation in this county that extends beyond his business dealings. His first wife left under mysterious circumstances. The woman before you, she disappeared one night, allegedly returning east, though no one ever received word of her arrival. A chill ran through Sarah. Frank had never mentioned a previous marriage, let alone two. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I believe you're in danger," Martha replied simply, "and because I'm offering you a way out." The tears Sarah had been holding back spilled over. "There is no way out. He would find me. He's made it very clear what would happen if I tried to leave." Martha reached across to grasp Sarah's hand. "Not if you have help. Not if you go somewhere he can't follow." For the next hour, Martha outlined a plan so simple yet daring that it left Sarah breathless with both hope and fear. The Rocking M had connections with ranches further west, in Idaho Territory. A position could be arranged housekeeper for a respectable family with quarters of her own and fair wages. Cooper Easton would escort her there, ensuring her safety on the journey. "But my marriage," Sarah protested weakly, "can be addressed through legal channels once you're safely away," Martha assured her. "My late brother was a judge in Cheyenne. His son practices law there now. When the time is right, he can help you file for divorce on grounds of cruelty." The very idea seemed impossible, yet Martha spoke with such quiet confidence that Sarah found herself beginning to believe. "When would I need to decide?" she asked finally. "Soon," Martha replied. "Cooper leaves for Idaho in 3 days' time. It would be the safest opportunity, as Frank knows he's departing the territory and wouldn't immediately connect his absence with yours." When Cooper returned to drive her home, Sarah was quiet, her mind whirling with possibilities and fears. He seemed to understand her need for silence, offering no conversation beyond necessary courtesy. As they approached her house, relief flooded through Sarah at the continued absence of Frank's buggy. Cooper brought the horses to a stop a discreet distance from the property. "Mrs. Hollister," he said quietly as he helped her down, "whatever you decide, know that there are people willing to help. You're not alone in this." Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Sarah glimpsed something in Cooper's gaze that frightened her almost as much as Frank's rage, not because it threatened harm, but because it offered something she had nearly forgotten existed: genuine care, untainted by ownership or control. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Easton," she managed, before turning quickly toward her house. That night, as she prepared dinner and waited for Frank's return, Sarah weighed her options with increasing desperation. Staying meant a life of escalating abuse, perhaps ending in the same mysterious disappearance as Frank's previous wives. Leaving meant risking his murderous rage if she were caught, abandoning everything familiar and placing her trust in virtual strangers. Frank returned later than usual, reeking of whiskey and spoiling for a fight. He criticized the meal, complained about her housekeeping, and finally found the pretext he seemed to be seeking when he discovered her note about the church charity. "There was no church event today," he snarled, crumpling the note in his fist. "I asked Jenkins' wife. She knew nothing about it." Sarah backed away, her heart pounding. "It was a small group, just a few of us." The back of his hand caught her across the face before she could finish, sending her stumbling against the kitchen table. "Stop lying," he roared. "You were with him, weren't you, that cowboy from the Morgan place?" "No, Frank, please." Sarah raised her hands defensively as he advanced on her. What followed was the worst beating she had endured yet. By the time Frank's rage was spent, Sarah lay curled on the kitchen floor, blood trickling from her split lip, her ribs aching with every breath. Frank stood over her, breathing heavily. "Clean yourself up," he ordered coldly. "And don't think about running to the doctor. You tell anyone about this, and I'll finish what I started." He stalked out, presumably headed back to the saloon, leaving Sarah to drag herself painfully upstairs. As she bathed her injuries with trembling hands, Sarah's decision crystallized through the haze of pain. She would rather die attempting to escape than wait for Frank to kill her in one of his rages. The next morning, every movement was agony as Sarah forced herself through her chores. Frank had departed early for a cattle auction in a neighboring town, giving her a reprieve until the following day. When she was certain he was well away, Sarah packed a small bundle of essential belongings and what little money she had managed to secretly set aside coins gleaned from household accounts and tucked into a hidden pocket in her sewing basket. Wrapping a shawl tightly around her shoulders despite the mild October day, Sarah made her way painfully toward town. She had no clear plan beyond reaching the Rockingham ranch, but instinct told her that waiting the 3 days for Cooper's scheduled departure might be 3 days too many. She had nearly reached the outskirts of town when the sound of an approaching rider made her heart sink. Ducking behind a stand of cottonwoods, she watched in horror as Frank's buggy appeared on the road, returning far earlier than expected. Panic seized her. If he reached home before she returned, if he discovered her missing along with her packed bundle. Sarah stumbled away from the road, no longer heading toward town but cutting across open country in the general direction of the Rockingham. The journey that should have taken 2 hours by road stretched into a grueling 4-hour ordeal as Sarah navigated unfamiliar terrain, her injuries slowing her progress. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion and pain threatened to overwhelm her. Each step became a conscious act of will as the rocking MTKS buildings finally appeared in the distance. She had nearly reached the ranch's outer fence when her strength finally failed. Sarah sank to the ground beneath a solitary oak tree, her vision blurring as she fought to remain conscious. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the pounding of hoofbeats and a familiar voice calling her name. Consciousness returned in fragments. The sensation of being carried, murmured voices, cool hands tending to her injuries. When Sarah finally opened her eyes fully, she found herself in an unfamiliar bedroom, late afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. "Welcome back," came Martha Morgan's gentle voice from beside the bed. "You gave us quite a scare, my dear." Sarah tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that radiated through her ribs. "How did Cooper found you at the edge of our property," Martha explained, helping her take a sip of water. "He was checking fence lines and saw you collapse. Good thing, too, you're badly hurt, Sarah." Memories flooded back Frank's unexpected return, her desperate flight across open country. "My husband," she whispered, fear returning in a crushing wave. "He'll be looking for me." "You're safe here," Martha assured her, patting her hand. "No one will harm you under my roof." The door opened quietly and Cooper entered, his expression shifting from concern to relief when he saw Sarah awake. "Mrs. Morgan, Dr. Wilson's just arrived." Martha nodded. "Send him in, and Cooper, post Thomas and James at the property entrance. No visitors without my express permission." After the doctor had examined her confirming 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising, and a mild concussion, Sarah was left alone to rest. Sleep eluded her, however, as anxiety about Frank's reaction to her disappearance kept her mind racing. A soft knock at the door preceded Cooper's entrance, bearing a tray with soup and bread. "Mrs. Morgan thought you might be hungry," he explained, setting the tray on the bedside table. Sarah managed a weak smile. "Thank you for everything, if you hadn't found me." Cooper pulled a chair closer to the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm just glad I was writing that section today instead of tomorrow." He hesitated before adding, "We need to discuss what happens next. Frank Hollister isn't a man to let go of what he considers his property." The blunt assessment, spoken without judgment or pity, steadied Sarah somehow. "I can't go back," she said simply. "I won't survive it this time." "No one's suggesting you should," Cooper assured her, "but our original plan needs adjustment. Word travels fast in these parts, and by now Hollister knows you're missing. The roads will be watched." "What can I do?" Sarah asked, desperation edging her voice. Cooper leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Morgan's nephew is arriving tomorrow from Cheyenne, the lawyer she mentioned. He can help establish legal protection for you. In the meantime, we accelerate our departure. Not Idaho, that route will be too obvious now. I have connections in Colorado, near Durango. It's rugged country where a man like Hollister would stand out like a sore thumb." Hope and fear warred within Sarah. "When? Tomorrow night," Cooper replied, After dark, we'll travel cross-country to avoid the main roads, then catch the southbound train at Rock Springs. The plan was audacious in its simplicity, relying on speed and the cover of darkness rather than elaborate deception. As Cooper outlined the details, Sarah found herself drawing strength from his quiet confidence. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You barely know me." Cooper was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes holding her steadily. "My mother lived with a man like your husband," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "For 15 years, she endured what no human being should have to endure. By the time she found the courage to leave, taking me and my sister with her, she was broken in ways that never fully healed." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. "What happened to him? Your father, stepfather," Cooper corrected, "and he found us 6 months later. Came in the night, dragged her from our cabin." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I was 14, old enough to load my mother's shotgun, but too late to stop him from beating her nearly to death. Not too late to make sure he never hurt anyone again." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah reached out impulsively, her fingers brushing his hand. "I'm sorry." Cooper's expression softened slightly. "My mother recovered eventually, remarried a decent man who treated her with respect, but I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I saw someone suffering the way she did." Before Sarah could respond, hoofbeats and raised voices from the yard below broke the moment. Cooper moved swiftly to the window, his posture tensing as he peered out. "It's Hollister," he said grimly. "With the sheriff." Terror washed through Sarah. "He'll force me to go back." "No, he won't," Cooper assured her, his voice hardening with resolve. "Mrs. Morgan knows how to handle the sheriff, and you're of age, not property to be claimed. Stay here, rest. I'll make sure they don't get past the front porch." After Cooper left, Sarah sat frozen in the bed, straining to hear the confrontation below. Though she couldn't make out specific words, the rising and falling cadence of angry male voices drifted up through the floorboards. Minutes stretched like hours before Martha finally appeared at her door, looking grim but satisfied. "The sheriff's gone and Frank with him," she reported. "For now, at least. I made it clear that you're here of your own free will, recovering from injuries that the doctor has documented. The sheriff's no fool, he's seen Frank's temper at the saloon often enough, but he's also an elected official and Frank has influence in this county." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, clutching the blanket tightly. "Now we move more quickly," Martha decided. "Cooper's preparing to leave tonight instead of tomorrow. The sooner you're beyond Frank's reach, the better." The hours that followed passed in a blur of careful preparation. Martha provided Sarah with clothing better suited for travel, a simple riding skirt and sturdy blouse, along with a warm coat against the October night chill. Cooper prepared the horses and mapped their route, avoiding roads where possible. As dusk settled over the ranch, Sarah stood in Martha's kitchen, saying goodbye to the woman who had offered help when no one else would. "I can never repay your kindness," she said softly, embracing the older woman. Martha patted her cheek gently. "Live well, my dear, that will be payment enough." She pressed a small leather pouch into Sarah's hand. "A little money to start your new life, and this," she handed over a sealed envelope. "A letter of introduction to my cousin in Durango. She'll help you get settled." Cooper appeared at the back door, his expression serious. "Time to go. There's no moon tonight, good cover for travel, but we'll need to move carefully." With a final embrace for Martha, Sarah followed Cooper to where 2 horses waited in the shadow of the barn. Her ribs protested as he helped her mount, but determination overcame pain as they set out across the darkened pasture, away from the ranch buildings. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, Cooper leading them on a winding path through stands of trees and across shallow streams. Sarah concentrated on staying upright in the saddle, each jolt sending fresh pain through her injured body. "We'll rest here briefly," Cooper finally said, drawing his horse to a halt in a small clearing sheltered by pine trees. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," Sarah replied, trying to keep the strain from her voice as he helped her dismount. Cooper studied her face in the dim starlight. "We've got about 4 more hours of riding to reach Rock Springs. The train doesn't leave until dawn, so we have time for short breaks." Sarah nodded, sinking gratefully onto a fallen log while Cooper checked the horses. The night was quiet around them, the vast Wyoming landscape somehow less threatening in darkness than it had been during her desperate daylight flight. "I've been thinking," she said as Cooper offered her his canteen, "about what happens after Colorado. I have no family, few skills beyond keeping house." "Mrs. Morgan's cousin runs a millinery shop in Durango," Cooper replied. "From what I understand, she's always looking for help. And you'd be surprised how valuable good household management skills can be in frontier towns." Sarah took a small sip of water. "And you, will you return to Wyoming after delivering me safely?" Cooper was silent for a moment, securing the canteen before answering. "No. There's a horse ranch outside Durango where I worked some years back. The owner's getting on in years, looking for someone to help run the place. That was my destination before all this." The coincidence seemed too convenient to be true. "You were already planning to go to Durango." "Before you knew about my situation," a slight smile touched Cooper's lips, visible even in the darkness. "Life has strange timing sometimes. I'd given Mr. Morgan notice weeks ago, had the Durango position arranged. Then I met you and—" he shrugged. "Some things just align when they're meant to." They remounted and continued their journey, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the southern foothills. Cooper kept them moving at a steady pace, occasionally stopping to listen for any signs of pursuit. During one such pause, Sarah whispered, "Do you think he'll follow us to Colorado?" Cooper's expression turned grim in the starlight. "Men like Hollister don't give up easily, but he'd be a fool to come after us alone, and the law can only help him so much once we cross territorial lines. The farther we get, the safer you'll be." They reached the outskirts of Rock Springs as the eastern sky began to lighten with pre-dawn gray. The small railroad town was already stirring, early workers moving toward the mines and shops preparing for the day's business. Cooper led them to a modest livery stable where a sleepy-eyed boy took charge of their horses. "Train station's 2 blocks that way," he told Sarah, shouldering their small packs. "We'll get tickets and wait inside, less conspicuous than standing on the platform." The station was nearly empty at that early hour, with only a drowsy ticket agent and a few traveling salesmen waiting for the southbound train. Cooper purchased their tickets to Grand Junction, Colorado, the first leg of their journey to Durango, and found a bench in the corner where they could observe the entrance without being immediately visible. Sarah sank onto the hard wooden seat, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The night's ride had taken a toll on her injured body, and now that their destination was in sight, the adrenaline that had sustained her was ebbing. "Try to rest," Cooper suggested, his voice gentle. "Train won't be here for another hour." She must have dozed, for the next thing Sarah knew, Cooper was tensing beside her, his posture alert as the station door swung open. Her heart nearly stopped as Frank Hollister stepped through, his gaze sweeping the small waiting room with predatory intensity. "Don't move," Cooper murmured, shifting slightly to block her from direct view. "There's a back door to the platform behind us. If I distract him, can you make it there?" Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, her entire body rigid with fear. Frank hadn't spotted them yet, his attention focused on questioning the ticket agent. Cooper slowly reached for something in his boot, a small revolver that Sarah hadn't realized he was carrying. Before either of them could move, however, the station door opened again and Sheriff Taylor entered, accompanied by 2 deputies. Frank turned, clearly startled by their appearance. "Frank Hollister," the sheriff's voice carried clearly across the station, "I need you to come with me." Frank's face contorted with rage. "What the hell for?" "I'm looking for my wife, you know that. Got a telegram from Cheyenne this morning," the sheriff replied evenly. "Seems you're wanted for questioning about the disappearance of your first wife, Emily Hollister. Her brother's been looking for her for 2 years, finally traced her last whereabouts to your homestead." The color drained from Frank's face. "That's ridiculous. She left me, went back east, maybe so," the sheriff cut him off, "but you're still coming with me until we sort this out." He gestured to his deputies, who moved to flank Frank. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." For a moment, it seemed Frank might resist. His hands clenched into fists, his gaze darting around the station and finally landing on Sarah and Cooper in their corner. Recognition and fury flashed across his features. "You," he snarled, taking a step toward them before the deputies caught his arms. "This is your doing, isn't it? You whore, you'll regret this, I swear to God." "That's enough," the sheriff barked, nodding to his deputies. "Get him out of here." As they dragged Frank struggling from the station, Cooper finally relaxed his grip on the revolver, though he didn't return it to his boot. "That was unexpected," he murmured. "Martha," Sarah whispered in sudden understanding. "She must have contacted the authorities in Cheyenne after we left." Cooper nodded slowly. "Wouldn't put it past her. Mrs. Morgan plays a long game." The tension that had gripped Sarah since their flight began finally eased slightly, though she knew this wasn't truly the end. Frank might be detained temporarily, but unless evidence of his crimes could be found, he would eventually be released. "This doesn't change our plans," Cooper said, seeming to read her thoughts. "The train will be here soon, and we still need to put as much distance as possible between us and Wyoming Territory." When the southbound train finally arrived in a cloud of steam and coal smoke, Cooper helped Sarah aboard, finding seats in the middle of a passenger car where they would be less noticeable. As the train pulled away from the station, Sarah watched the town of Rock Springs recede into the distance, along with the life she was leaving behind. "It's really happening," she murmured, almost to herself. "I'm actually free." Cooper's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance that lasted only a moment before propriety reasserted itself. "The journey's just beginning," he reminded her gently. "But yes, you've taken the hardest step." The train journey to Grand Junction took the better part of 2 days, with several stops along the way. Sarah's strength returned gradually, aided by regular meals and the absence of constant fear. She and Cooper maintained a careful distance in public, presenting themselves as a brother escorting his sister to family in Colorado, a fiction that prevented unwanted questions from fellow travelers. In private moments, however, when the train's rhythm lulled other passengers to sleep, or when they spoke quietly over meals, a deeper connection was forming. Cooper shared stories of his life after leaving his stepfather's shadow, the years working cattle drives across the Western Territories, his dreams of someday owning his own horse ranch, the books he read by lamplight in bunkhouses from Montana to Texas. Sarah, in turn, spoke of her childhood on her father's farm in Missouri, her 2 years at a ladies' academy in St. Louis before the drought forced her return home, her love of music and painting that Frank had quickly suppressed as frivolous wastes of time. "I used to play the piano quite well," she confessed as they shared a simple dinner in the train's dining car. "Our church had an old upright that the minister let me practice on. I haven't touched a keyboard in nearly a year." "There's a decent piano in the hotel in Durango," Cooper remarked. "The owner's wife was some kind of musician back east. She lets people play it sometimes in the evenings." Sarah smiled at the thought. "I'd like that, to have music again." By the time they reached Grand Junction, the worst of Sarah's physical injuries were healing, though the emotional scars would take far longer to fade. From there, they took a stagecoach south toward Durango, the landscape changing dramatically as they entered the rugged mountain country of southwestern Colorado. Durango itself was smaller than Willow Creek, but more vibrant somehow, a mining and railroad town nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks. As promised, Martha Morgan's cousin Charlotte Mason welcomed them warmly, offering Sarah a position in her millinery shop and a room in her comfortable home above the business. Martha's letter explained everything, Charlotte assured her over tea that first evening. "You're safe here, my dear." Frank Hollister wouldn't dare show his face in Durango, and if he did, he'd find no welcome. The horse ranch where Cooper had arranged employment lay 5 miles outside town, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain propriety. As they stood on Charlotte's porch the evening of their arrival, An awkward silence fell between them for the first time since their journey began. "I'll come by in a few days once you're settled," Cooper finally said, hat in hand. "Make sure you're getting along all right." Sarah nodded, suddenly uncertain. This man had risked everything to help her escape, had shown her kindness without expectation, had become in just a few days' time the person she trusted most in the world. Yet now that they had reached safety, the proper distance between a single woman and man reasserted itself like an invisible barrier. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for all she felt. "I wouldn't have survived without your help." Cooper's blue eyes held hers for a long moment. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah Vance. You would have found a way." It was the first time he had used her maiden name, a deliberate choice that acknowledged her freedom from Frank Hollister more completely than any legal document could have done. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Sarah's life. She learned the millinery trade under Charlotte's patient guidance, discovering an aptitude for design that delighted her employer. She made acquaintances in town, attended church on Sundays, and gradually began to reclaim parts of herself that had been suppressed during her marriage. Cooper visited town regularly, sometimes stopping by the shop to tip his hat and inquire after her welfare, occasionally joining her and Charlotte for Sunday dinner. Always respectful, always careful not to compromise Sarah's reputation in her new community, yet she could feel his gaze following her when he thought she wasn't looking. In November, a telegram arrived from Martha Morgan, bringing news that sent Sarah's carefully reconstructed world tilting on its axis once more. Frank Hollister charged with murder of first wife. Remains found buried near barn. He awaits trial in Cheyenne. You are safe now. Martha. Charlotte found Sarah weeping in the back room of the shop, the telegram clutched in her trembling hands. "Oh, my dear girl," the older woman murmured, embracing her. "It's over truly now. I could have been next," Sarah whispered, "if I hadn't left when I did." That evening, Sarah sat alone at the piano in the hotel lobby, her fingers finding their way through a Chopin nocturne she had once known by heart. The music flowed tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence as muscle memory returned. She was so absorbed in the piece that she didn't notice Cooper's arrival until he spoke from behind her. "That's beautiful," he said quietly as the final notes faded. Sarah turned on the bench, surprised to find him standing there in his best clothes rather than his usual work attire. "Cooper. I didn't expect to see you tonight. Charlotte told me about the telegram," he explained. "Thought you might need a friend." They walked together through Durango's quiet streets, the late November air crisp with the promise of winter. Sarah shared the complicated emotions the news had triggered: relief that Frank could never harm her again, horror at the confirmation of what had happened to his first wife, guilt that she had somehow survived when Emily Hollister had not. "You can't blame yourself for surviving," Cooper told her as they paused on the bridge spanning the Animas River. "You found the courage to leave before it was too late. With help," she reminded him. "I wouldn't have made it without you and Martha." Cooper shook his head. "You were already on your way to the Rocking M when I found you. That took more courage than most people have in a lifetime." The moonlight silvered the water below them, casting Cooper's features in gentle relief. Sarah studied him openly for perhaps the first time, the strength in his lean frame, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the small scar at his temple that hinted at past struggles. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now that I'm truly free?" "That's entirely up to you," Cooper replied. "You've got a good position with Charlotte. People in town respect you. You're building a new life. Whatever you want for your future, it's yours to decide. And if what I want includes you..." The words slipped out before Sarah could reconsider them, surprising her with their boldness. Cooper's expression shifted, caution giving way to something warmer. "I'd say that's the best news I've heard in a long while." He hesitated before adding, "But there's no rush, Sarah. You've just regained your freedom. I wouldn't want to." "I'm not rushing," she interrupted gently. "I'm choosing." "There's a difference." December brought snow to the mountains and preparations for Christmas throughout Durango. Sarah threw herself into the holiday spirit, helping decorate Charlotte's shop and home, baking cookies from her mother's recipes, and even joining the church choir for the Christmas Eve service. Cooper invited her to ride out to the ranch one clear Sunday afternoon to see the progress he'd made on the small cabin he was building at the edge of the property, for the future, he explained without elaboration, though the implication was clear in his eyes. As winter deepened into January, their courtship progressed with a deliberateness that honored Sarah's need to heal before embarking on a new relationship. Cooper never pushed, never assumed, always letting Sarah set the pace of their growing connection. In February, a letter arrived from Martha's nephew in Cheyenne, informing Sarah that Frank Hollister had been convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. The legal dissolution of her marriage would be straightforward under the circumstances, he assured her, and enclosed papers for her signature. "You don't have to witness it," Cooper told her when she shared the news. "The hanging, I mean, some might think you should for closure, but that's not always the way healing works." Sarah's hand found his as they sat together on Charlotte's porch swing. "I don't need to see it. Knowing he can never hurt anyone else is enough." By early spring, Sarah's divorce was finalized, legally confirming the freedom she had claimed for herself months earlier. The night she received the final documents, Cooper invited her to dinner at Durango's finest restaurant, a celebration, he called it, of her new beginning. As they walked back to Charlotte's afterward, Cooper guided her toward the river rather than directly home. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky as they reached the same bridge where they had stood months earlier. "I have something to ask you," Cooper said, his usual confidence giving way to an endearing nervousness. "And I want to be clear that there's no expectation, no pressure. Whatever your answer, my respect and care for you won't change." Sarah's heart quickened as he took her hands in his. "Cooper, let me finish before I lose my nerve," he interrupted with a small smile. "Sarah Vance, you are the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known. Watching you rebuild your life these past months has been a privilege. I'd be honored if you'd consider sharing that life with me as my wife." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but unlike those she had shed so often during her first marriage, these came from joy rather than pain. "Are you certain, after everything?" "Because of everything," Cooper corrected gently. "You know the worst of human nature and survived it. That makes your capacity for love and trust all the more remarkable." Sarah studied their joined hands for a long moment. "My first marriage began with my father's decision, not mine. I had no choice then." She looked up, meeting Cooper's anxious gaze. "This time the choice is mine alone." "And I choose you, Cooper Easton. Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in Durango's small church on a perfect day in May 1879, with Charlotte serving as Sarah's matron of honor and Martha Morgan making the journey from Wyoming to witness their union. The ceremony was simple but joyful, the celebration afterward filled with music and laughter. Their home, the cabin Cooper had been building through the winter, sat on a ridge overlooking the horse ranch, with windows that caught the morning sun and a wide porch for summer evenings. Sarah filled it with small touches that made it truly theirs. Curtains she sewed herself, a bookshelf for Cooper's growing collection, and in the corner of the main room, a small piano that Cooper had somehow arranged to have delivered from Denver as a wedding gift. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all marriages do, adjustments to living together, occasional disagreements about household decisions, the everyday friction of two independent people building a shared life. But never once did Sarah feel the fear that had characterized her first marriage. Disagreements were resolved with words, not fists. Difficult days ended with reconciliation, not recrimination. By their first anniversary, Sarah was helping manage the business side of the horse ranch while continuing to design hats for Charlotte's shop one day a week. Cooper's skill with horses had earned him a partnership offer from the ranch's aging owner, the beginning of the dream he had nursed for so many years. It was on that anniversary evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, that Sarah shared her news. "I visited Dr. Matthews in town yesterday," she said, her hand finding Cooper's. "We're going to have a baby come December." The joy that spread across Cooper's face was answer enough, but he pulled her gently into his arms, his hands cradling her face with a tenderness that still sometimes brought tears to her eyes. "Sarah Easton," he whispered, "you have made me the happiest man alive." As twilight deepened around them, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from a frightened young wife hiding bruises in Wyoming Territory to a confident woman building a family with a man who valued her strength rather than seeking to break it. Their daughter, Martha Charlotte Easton, arrived during the first snowfall of December, a healthy, strong, lunged baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. As Sarah watched Cooper hold their daughter for the first time, his big hands impossibly gentle with the tiny bundle, she felt the last shadows of her past recede. Over the years that followed, their family grew with the addition of twin sons, Thomas and James, born in the autumn of 1882. The horse ranch flourished under Cooper's management, eventually becoming their own when the original owner retired to California. Sarah's millinery designs gained recognition beyond Durango, bringing orders from as far away as Denver and Santa Fe. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Sarah often played the piano while Cooper listened from his chair by the fire, the music filling their home with the joy she had once thought lost to her forever. Sometimes, when a particular melody touched him deeply, he would rise and draw her from the piano bench into his arms, dancing slowly in the firelit room. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked him once during such a moment. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't been riding fence that day, if you hadn't found me." Cooper's arms tightened slightly around her. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he replied. "Some things are meant to be no matter the path." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I used to think the best I could hope for was survival. I never imagined this, happiness, safety, love. You deserved all of it," Cooper told her, his voice rough with emotion. "From the first moment I saw you in that store, trying so hard to hide your bruises, I knew you deserved so much more than what life had given you." Sarah looked up at him, her hand rising to touch his face, a mirror of that long-ago moment when he had first truly seen her pain. "You took my face in your hands and promised not anymore," she reminded him softly. "You've kept that promise every day since." As their children grew, Sarah and Cooper made certain they understood the value of kindness, the importance of standing up for those who couldn't protect themselves. They created a home where voices were never raised in anger, where disagreements were resolved with respect, where love was expressed openly and without reservation. Martha Morgan remained a cherished friend until her passing in 1890, leaving the Rocking M to a nephew with instructions that Cooper Easton always be welcome there. Sarah maintained her correspondence with Charlotte, who eventually retired from the millinery business to live with her sister in Denver, but visited Durango every Christmas without fail. The years softened some memories while sharpening others. Sarah never forgot the terror of those dark days with Frank, but those memories no longer held power over her present happiness. Instead, they served as a reminder of her own strength, of her capacity to overcome, of the life she had built through courage and determination with the help of a cowboy who had seen past her bruises to the woman beneath. By the turn of the century, with their children nearly grown and the ranch prosperous under their joint management, Sarah and Cooper had become fixtures in the Durango community, respected business owners, generous neighbors, and still, after more than 20 years together, visibly in love. On quiet summer evenings, they could often be found on their porch swing, Cooper's arm around Sarah's shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the Colorado sky in hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of their hopes for their children, of their plans for the ranch, of the travels they might undertake when the younger generation took over the daily operations. More often, though, they simply sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes only after years of shared joys and sorrows, the kind that needs no words to express the depth of connection between two people who have truly become one heart. And if sometimes, in such moments, Cooper's fingers gently traced the line of Sarah's cheek, the same cheek that had once borne the marks of another man's cruelty. It was not to recall past pain, but to celebrate present joy. The journey from darkness into light, from fear into love, from a woman who tried to hide her bruises to one who lived every day in the promise of not anymore.